Hasan Piker, one of the top political Twitch streamers that there is, and Vaush, who's a big, not just a big Twitch streamer, but also a big YouTuber as well. They were both banned from Twitch for saying the word cracker. So let me go ahead and show you here. Nathan Grayson says, Twitch has suspended two popular political streamers, Hasan the Hun and Vaush V, for using the word cracker, which Twitch seemingly considers a slur. You can see Hasan is responding there to streamer ban's Twitch partner, Hasanabi, has been banned. Yes, it is for exactly what you think it is, anti-white racism, for using the term cracker. Okay, so he was the first to go. We'll get to the details of that in a second. And then Vaush talked about Hasan being banned, and he says, it's a massacre. He went down for hateful slurs or symbols, using hateful slurs, hate symbols, or hate group emblems without context or in a harmful manner. Examples of violative conduct include, but are not limited to, insulting another person with a hateful slur on stream, posting an ASC2, I don't know what that is, representation of a hate symbol in chat, uploading profile content that contains hateful slurs. Okay, so my understanding is that what happened with Hasan is he was repeatedly using the word cracker, and then he was getting some pushback from his chat, and so he invited somebody on to discuss the word cracker, and the argument that he was making is like, listen, you might not like it, you might even consider it a slur, but the fact of the matter is cracker does not hold the same sort of potency as the N-word does. And so when having this conversation, we have to be nuanced and understand that there's a long history of oppression and subjugation that goes along with the N-word that doesn't exist for cracker. And, I mean, look, the fact of the matter is, if you're a white person and you've ever been called a cracker, your response generally is probably to just sort of laugh it off. Whereas if you're a black person and you've been called the N-word, hard ER at the end by some white person, it doesn't evoke the same emotions. So that's what happened with Hasan. Like I said, Hasan was banned. I believe it's for 7 days, but I'm not 100% sure. So Vaush does a video afterwards where he's basically talking about the Hasan Piker situation and just giving his take on the Hasan Piker situation. And he didn't even call anybody cracker. And then he got banned just for having the conversation about the term cracker. Whereas Hasan early on was calling people cracker. Then he had the discussion about whether or not it's okay and whether or not there's a comparison between that and the N-word. Now, what Vaush actually said on stream was interesting. He goes, look, I'll freely acknowledge I think cracker is a slur. He said, I also think Karen is a slur. And then he says, but I'm still going to use them. And he said, be a chat about it. And, effectively, if you're going to get banned for saying it, okay, get banned for saying it. And then he was banned. And so then his response to that was something along the lines of LMAO. So, he kind of thought it was funny. I don't sense much hypocrisy on the side of Vaush here. He says, look, terms of service are what they are. They have the, if they want to enforce them as they are, then go right ahead, and I have no issue with it. So he doesn't seem to have an issue with himself being banned. I don't know how long he's banned for. It might be longer than Hasan, or maybe indefinitely. I think with Hasan, like I said, I saw that it was a week, but I could be incorrect about that. Now, Hasan, on the other hand, is effectively going out there and saying, listen, I think it's bullshit that I was banned. These words are not equivalent. This doesn't count as a slur. Insofar as this is a slur, so is redneck, so is honky, so is, this laundry list of other things, and nobody really gets banned for that. Honestly, again, to make the Karen point, it is in a similar category as cracker, and nobody really gets banned for that. In fact, Elon Musk was just on Twitter calling Senator Warren a cracker, or excuse me, not a cracker, a Karen. He said, don't call the manager on me, Karen, when she made the argument, hey, maybe somebody worth about $297 billion should pay more in taxes. So, if there is some sort of objective enforcement across all the social media platforms, which clearly there's not, and they don't have the same terms of service, but if there was, then somebody would get banned for saying Karen in the same way they'd get banned for saying cracker, in the same way they'd get banned for saying the N-word. Now, what's my take on this? Well, perhaps fully none of you are going to be surprised to hear my take on this, which is that I'm a free speech absolutist. And we'll get into the details of that and the complexities of that and what that means in a second, but I think it's absurd that they were banned. Now, critics are pointing out, hey, listen, they are not free speech absolutists. So, it's what goes around comes around. Chicken's coming home to roost type situation. So if they're, cheering on other people getting banned, well, hey, now you got banned. So how you like them apples? To which I respond, I am consistent on this. And Vaush was like, hey, if they want to ban me, they can ban me. That's their prerogative. So he's consistent on it as well. But I'm consistent on the other side of it, where I say, no, they shouldn't get banned. And no, roughly 90% of the people, 80 to 90% of the people who are getting banned for various things, I don't think they should get banned either. So, I've defended right-wing ghouls, who I have a lot less in common with than I do with Vaush and Hasan. I've defended right-wing ghouls when they get banned for trying to be an edgelord and saying something dumb. And then you dig into their history, and they're massive hypocrites. And, they're cheerleading on bands of lefties, but then when they get banned, it's, oh my God, my free speech. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here is I don't really care who's a hypocrite and who's not a hypocrite, because the real conversation is, what are the standards and what should happen here? And in my opinion, this isn't even close to ban-worthy. Now, I do think there's obviously a substantive and historical difference between the N-word, hard ER, and cracker. But look, maybe I'll say something controversial here. Maybe this is a Kyle hot take here for everybody. But I don't think you should necessarily get banned for using the N-word. Now, if it's in the context of harassment, well, that's a different conversation. Because even to the biggest free speech absolutist, there are rules. And even with our First Amendment, we're the most free speech absolutist country on paper in the world here in the U.S. And even there are certain rules and certain things that you can't say. But if somebody's rapping to a rap song on stream and they say it, totally fine. If somebody's using it as a term of endearment in the black community, among the black community, one to the other person, I think that's totally fine. Obviously, there's a difference between hard ER and soft A. I think these things are phenomenally nuanced. But the most important point is this. I don't think that the conversation is being had in an honest way on the topic of free speech. Because usually the sense that you get is the people who are not, quote-unquote, free speech absolutists, their position ultimately boils down to, well, let's go on a case-by-case basis. Like, let's look at each thing on its own and then determine whether or not it's ban-worthy. But there's a huge problem with implementing some sort of policy like that. And the problem with that is people wildly disagree about what is subjectively acceptable. So, lefties might say, hey, let cracker go, but ban every time somebody says the N-word, whether it's hard ER or soft A, just ban it. But then you might have right-wingers who say the exact opposite. Or you might have right-wingers who say, let it all go. And once you open that door to look at it on a case-by-case basis and try to determine what the best path is, I think that really is a genuine slippery slope, and you're opening Pandora's box, and the end result is going to be nowhere near some sort of reasonable standard of what's allowed and what's not allowed. So my overall breakdown on this situation is I would like to see all the big social media outlets become public utilities, and then you expand First Amendment protections, and the things that you're not allowed to do, you can't do libel, you can't do slander, you can't do doxing, you can't do targeted harassment, you can't do direct threats of violence. But outside of those 5 general things, you really should be able to say almost whatever you want to say. Now, even implementing an enforcement mechanism like I just laid out, that's not easy. There's still going to be subjective interpretation that goes into it, and there will be some disagreement about what should be allowed and what shouldn't be allowed. But at least you're narrowing the focus in a way that is way more reasonable than the approach that we currently have now, where the different platforms have their different terms of service. And ultimately, what I really think ended up happening here is what I warned would happen once we start going down the path of censorship and banning and deplatforming and things of that nature, is that the right-wingers have this victim complex that a lot of their people are getting banned, and they say getting banned unjustly. So what happens is, as a direct result of that, they then launch these campaigns where they say, look, if you're going to start banning people and deplatforming people and censoring people, you at least have to be fair about it and make it equal. And so then they say, well, here's a lefty who's using a racial slur, so you have to ban them. And if you don't, that proves that you're biased against the right. And so the social media platforms are so sensitive to the criticism of like you have a liberal bias that they can't wait to both sides of the situation and say, no, we're fair. See, we've banned right-wingers, but we've also banned left-wingers. We also banned one of the top Twitch streamers that there is, Hasan Piker, for violating our terms of service. So what happens is the right cries bloody murder and plays the victim and says, we're getting banned disproportionately. And so then the companies overreact and say, okay, we'll crack down on the left too. And then you get totally unfair bans. But all this was completely predictable because everybody warned you from day one that once you open up this door, there's no closing this door, and it's just going to be a ban fest. And it's going to be people looking for whatever tiny infraction you could find, and they use that as an excuse. So, I mean, now, when you get into the specific cases, I've talked about this before. In the case of Milo Yiannopoulos, when he got banned from Twitter, I believe it was, I initially thought, well, that's sort of bullshit. He's just a shit poster and an edgelord, and he says terrible things. But then when I read into the situation further, what I found was he actually genuinely committed libel and slander against, I forget the black female SNL comedian who he did it to. Doesn't matter. But anyway, he faked tweets saying they were hers, tweeted them out to his massive following, and the tweets, said wildly like anti-Semitic stuff and terrible stuff. And so he was portraying this woman as saying something that she didn't say, and really, it's like a defamation type thing, destroying her character, destroying her chance, to have a career because nobody would want to work with her, assuming those tweets are true. And so it was like a brazen lie that was libelous and slanderous. And so when I read further into that situation with Milo, I was like, oh, I actually understand why he got banned. It had nothing to do with free speech. He's literally just doing libel and slander. Now, the Alex Jones situation, Alex Jones, the main thing was the Sandy Hook thing. Okay, so he says it's a hoax. He says it's a conspiracy. He says it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again on his show. And then what happened was psychopaths in his audience took the ball and ran with it, and they sort of looked up the addresses of where the parents lived of the kids who died, and then they went and harassed them and said, like, your kids didn't die. Terrible in 1,000 different ways. Now, he didn't directly say, go do this. He didn't directly give the addresses. He just did the conspiracy stuff. So I genuinely think, as terrible as Alex Jones is, that was like a borderline case in terms of banning. But if you wanted to say, hey, listen, those particular videos or those particular tweets, they cross a line and they are libelous, they are slanderous, well, then that's one thing. And I think that's a reasonable take to have. But to effectively give the internet death penalty, which is what they did, I think that opened up the door to a really slippery slope. And we've seen it 1,000 times over. Remember the Proper Not blacklist, where it was all under the guise of we have to fight Russian disinformation. And you had this list come out. Hey, here are all the websites, these news websites that are not legitimate and that need to be buried in the algorithm. And then they were buried in the algorithm. So yeah, you got some right-wing sites that were in there that were genuinely bad sites that didn't give any real information and weren't doing real news. But then you also had, outlets like Counterpunch and Alternet and, various real, genuine anti-imperialist left-wing sites and, economically lefty news sites. And I remember covering that and saying, look, this is why, in principle, you have to defend even those who you disagree with. Again, if what's going on is libel, slander, doxing, targeted harassment, or direct threats of violence, everybody agrees that that's got to go. But outside of that, on political content alone, you just can't open up this door because without a doubt, it's going to swing back around to hurt you and the people you like and the people you care about. And, another great example of it is, okay, so people want to ban all, far right-wingers, white supremacists, whatever. Well, then immediately after that, they'll scream bloody murder and say, you got to get rid of the tankies. You got to get rid of the Soviet Union apologists. You got to get rid of the people who glorify like Mao or whatever. Now, you might say, hey, that's a tiny number on the left or whatever. But as a matter of principle, those people have a right to speak unless they're doing libel, slander, doxing, targeted harassment, or direct threats of violence. If they're not doing that, this is what freedom is. Freedom is the ability to say things, even things that could be stupid, dumb, hateful, even bigoted, as long as you're not crossing those very clear lines, then it should be allowed. And so, look, in the case of Hasan and in the case of Vaush, yes, they're open about the fact that they're not free speech absolutists, but I am. And I think what they did doesn't remotely come close to an offense that should lead to banning. I really don't even think it's a close call. And the other thing I would say is, for everybody on the right who's like sort of tap dancing on their graves right now, well, you're colossal hypocrites too. Of course you are. Because you got the main claim that these guys make is, hey, even when it's somebody you disagree with, you have to stand, in solidarity with them because the principle is more important. Well, here's your opportunity. And instead, what do they go to? Here's a tweet from Hasan where he's against, free speech. Okay, but do you have anything to say about the issue as such, as opposed to the stupid hypocrisy burning, which we could all sit here and do all day? So, listen, if you're on the right, it's a real test of whether or not you believe in the principle. Now, I won't hold my breath because I don't think many of them actually believe in the principle. I think it's just a power game to them. But insofar as you actually care about the issue, you should take a stand when somebody you disagree with and when it's somebody you agree with. So I think it's totally absurd. And I do think that there's fundamentally a difference between the history of the words, cracker versus the N-word. But at the same time, like I said, and again, maybe this is my hottest take in this segment, I don't think it should necessarily be a ban anytime somebody uses the N-word. If it's used in the context of targeted harassment, of course, then you can do it. But if it's not used in the context of targeted harassment, I would even allow that. So, I don't know how to make it any more plain than I am, but I hate it when people just want to play the opinion game and like, well, things are different when people say different things, therefore, let's take it on a case-by-case basis. No, because who the hell should have the power to determine ultimately? You want some random group of Silicon Valley investors? Some multimillionaires and billionaires deciding what's allowed and what's not allowed? You want some fact-check administration, which no doubt is going to be filled with people that have their own biases and their own interpretations and their own blind spots? So who's going to fact-check the fact-checkers? Who really is going to ultimately determine here? So I think the least bad of all bad options is regulate these companies, these big social media companies, like their public utilities, expand First Amendment protections, and basically you have it so that the only things that you can't do are libel, slander, doxing, targeted harassment, and direct threats of violence. And then outside of that, it's all systems go. And I will say, but final point on this, that is the actual leftist position. Guys, it's a right-wing position when you say, hey, terms of service are what they are, and a private company can enforce them, so let them do whatever they want. That's a capitalist position. That's a right-wing position. That's a libertarian position, as in like right-wing libertarian, Ron Paul-style libertarian, because that idea is, hey, let the private company do whatever they want to do. Lefties don't say that in any other context. Do you say that when it comes to Wall Street? Do you say that when it comes to the military-industrial complex? This, like, hands-off, let the mini-dictatorship do whatever they want with their own little mini-dictatorship corporation? No, we never say that. The left always says, look, there's got to be reasonable rules and regulations. And in this instance, the reasonable rule and regulation is treat the big social media companies like their public utilities and expand First Amendment protections. That's the actual lefty position. So I just want to put that on the record, too, because people sort of, they take their eye off the ball in this broader conversation. But that's the most important point, is that the real leftist position is regulate them like their public utilities, expand First Amendment protections. The only things you don't allow are libel, slander, doxing, targeted harassment, and direct threats of violence. So, anyway, there you have it. Free Hasan Piker, free Vaush. It's absurd that they're banned. And believe me, guys, it's only going to get worse. The tiniest infractions you can imagine. The infractions will get tinier and tinier and tinier. And as long as anybody claims offense, sincerely or not, people will start getting banned left and right. And so that's not a world I want to live in. If you don't like what you're hearing, just don't watch it. That's simple. Not like, now I'm going to get them pulled for everybody so everybody else can't even hear them. That is deeply, deeply authoritarian, and there's no other word for it. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.